So when we think about pandemics that really changed history, the Black Death usually comes up, maybe the Spanish flu.
Right. Those are the big ones.
But what if I told you there was, like, another huge one, thousands of years before that? A sort of forgotten plague that might have completely rerouted early human history. If you're looking to get smart, fast, on these kinds of, well, really significant topics, this deep dive should be right up your alley.
Yeah, exactly. Today we're looking into this really compelling idea that a plague caused by, get this, Yersinia pestis,
The Black Death
the
bacterium.
very same one that this played a really big part in a major population crash back in the late Neolithic. We're talking over 5,000 years ago.
Okay, wow. And we're basing this on an article, right, called The Ancient Plague That Killed Millions Before the Black Death. Sounds like it pulls together DNA studies, archaeology.
That's the one. It synthesizes a lot of the recent genetic work, archaeological finds, and it paints this, well, pretty convincing picture of a prehistoric pandemic.
So our mission here for you listening is to unpack that evidence.
hmm We want to understand, how widespread this thing was, what kind of impact it really had on these early societies, and, well, what does it all mean for how we see the dawn of civilization? Let's dive in.
Okay, so the article starts with a bit of a mystery, doesn't it? These, like, Neolithic people, seemingly healthy, young,
Right.
one in Latvia, one in Sweden,
Right, different places.
who just die around the same time. No obvious, violence, no starvation. It's a real head scratcher.
And the kicker is, researchers found out both of them miles apart were victims of Yersinia pestis.
Whoa.
Yeah, which was a huge surprise, because everyone thought white pestis was much, much younger. Medieval, basically.
Right. But this new DNA work is, like, pushing the timeline way back.
Way back, we're now seeing evidence that white pestis was around maybe 6,000, even 7,000 years ago. It seems it evolved from a related bug, Y pseudotuberculosis.
And it's not just those two individuals, is it? This is showing up elsewhere.
Oh, absolutely. Scientists are finding this ancient plague DNA in teeth, bits of skull,
Yeah.
people all across Eurasia.
Teeth and skulls? That's amazing it survives.
It is. Those hard tissues protect the DNA for millennia. And finding it so widespread really suggests it wasn't just a few isolated spots. It was, circulating pretty broadly back then.
Okay, so it's across a big area, but, like, how many people are we talking about? What was the scale within those communities?
Well, the geographic scope looks pretty big right across Eurasia, even up to Scandinavia. And one study, they looked at over 100 Neolithic individuals
Mm-hmm.
and found definite Y. pestis infection in about 17% of them.
17%.
Yeah.
That's not insignificant at all. But there was one site the article mentions that really hits harder, right? A family burial.
Yes, that one's particularly, well, sobering. A burial site, 38 people, clearly related family members, and an incredible 32% tested positive for the plague.
32%. Wow, within
Yeah.
one family. That really brings home the devastation like you see in, modern outbreaks.
It really does. It gives you a sense of the mortality.
And it wasn't just one kind of plague. They found evidence of all three types.
That's right. The genetic markers point to bubonic,
Oh.
lymph node swelling, flea-borne types, septicemic, which is the really nasty blood infection,
Right.
and even pneumonic, the lung version, which can spread person to person.
Yeah.
And incredibly, some people seem to have had more than one type at the same time. It suggests a really severe, complex disease back then.
Okay, so we've got this deadly, widespread disease hitting a significant chunk of the population. Now let's connect it to the bigger picture, this Neolithic decline. The article talks about these huge early settlements, mega settlements, right?
Yeah. Places like Maidanetsk in Ukraine, huge for the time, maybe up to 50,000 people living there.
50,000. Wow.
And you can imagine conditions probably weren't super sanitary, lots of stored grain, attracting rodents, which means fleas.
Right.
It was basically like the perfect breeding ground for plague to just explode.
A perfect storm brewing, almost. Dense populations, conditions ripe for disease. And then there's that archaeological evidence, burnt settlements.
Yes. Finding these places deliberately burned down is, well, it's a pretty strong clue. It really suggests people were desperately trying to stop whatever was killing them. Fire might have been the only way they knew to, try and disinfect or get rid of infected stuff, like flea-ridden homes.
And the timing fits too, doesn't it? The article says this big population drop across Eurasia, maybe by as much as 50% in some places,
Huge drop.
happened roughly between 3450 and 3000 BCE. Right when the Y. Pestis evidence seems to ramp up, settlements abandon, these big stone structures, megaliths stop being built. It looks like society was really falling apart.
Precisely. And it wasn't necessarily quick. That family burial site, for instance, showed plague transmission over 6 generations. It's like 120 years.
Wow, 120 years.
So it wasn't just one bad season. It seems like a long, drawn-out period of infection hitting communities again and again.
And the research points to maybe 3 distinct waves of this plague.
Yes, it looks like 3 waves. And the third one seems to have been the real killer, hitting right when those mega settlements started to collapse and vanish from the record.
But it wasn't just the disease killing people directly, was it? The article mentions evidence of violence in some of these mass graves.
Yeah, that's the really dark part. Alongside people who clearly died from plague, they're finding bodies showing signs of violence. Murdered families, warriors with trauma.
Oh, wow.
It paints this really grim picture of, social breakdown, fear, stress, maybe leading to conflict. It's not unlike what historians described during the Black Death, actually.
Which leads to the big question, I guess. Was it only the plague causing this massive decline?
Well, the article is careful about that. It brings up other factors, alternative ideas.
Right, like a localized variation idea, that it didn't hit everywhere equally hard, like Germany had lower rates?
Exactly. Some areas, like parts of Germany, maybe only saw infection rates of like 1.5 to 5%, much lower.
Yeah.
So the impact wasn't uniform across Europe. And then there's this universal fear hypothesis, the idea that maybe all the warfare and violence already happening back then pushed people into those crowded mega settlements for safety.
Ah, so packing them in, ironically making the disease spread worse.
Potentially, yeah. More crowding, maybe worse sanitation, plus the stress of conflict possibly hitting fertility and overall health.
And what about the environment? Climate change.
That's another factor. There's some evidence of a cooling climate around then,
Yeah.
potentially leading to agricultural decline, crop failures, food shortages. That would put enormous stress on any society, pandemic or not. Makes them more vulnerable.
So probably a mix of things. Plague, maybe conflict, climate stress.
Most likely a combination. But even with those other factors, the number of deaths potentially caused by the plague itself is just staggering. The article throws out a figure of maybe 5 million.
5 million. And the article suggests proportionally that might have been even worse than the Spanish flu or AIDS.
That's the comparison they make. It really gives you a sense of just the sheer scale of this ancient crisis. It's hard to even wrap your head around.
Truly. And the recovery took ages.
In some places, yeah. Over 3,000 years for populations to bounce back demographically. It shows how deep and long-lasting the disruption was.
And what's really weird is that this early version of Y. pestis, it wasn't even as nasty as the medieval one, right? Less infectious.
Apparently so. Less infectious, maybe less immediately fatal than the Black Death strain. And yet, it still seems to have been capable of bringing down entire cultures.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting, the bigger implications. This whole discovery just forces us to rethink early human history, doesn't it?
Absolutely. We tend to focus on, farming, technology driving change. But this shows that biological disasters, pandemics, were probably a huge, maybe underestimated force right from the start.
So the very things that let societies get bigger and more complex settlements, trade also made them vulnerable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a kind of paradox. Growth brought new risks. The rise of complex societies created the conditions for biological catastrophes. It's a really sobering thought about progress, even back then.
It kind of reframes the whole Neolithic period. Maybe it was the first real age of pandemics.
That's a powerful way to put it. It certainly challenges the idea that early humans were somehow shielded from this stuff. It seems these threats are deeply intertwined with human development itself. And I think the key takeaway for you, listening, is that pandemics aren't new. They're not just modern. They've been shaping us profoundly for millennia.
Yeah. So for you trying to get a handle on really important knowledge quickly, this is one of those aha moments. Realizing the story of pandemics goes way, way back, right to the roots of civilization.
It really shows the enduring power of infectious disease to reshape human societies, no matter how simple or complex we think we are.
Okay, so let's just quickly recap then. The evidence we've discussed today, it strongly suggests that a Yersinia pestis plague was a major player in the huge population crash and societal shifts back in the late Neolithic.
Yeah, millions dead, potentially. A catastrophe that really seems to have altered the path of early human development.
And maybe the final thought to leave you with is this. If a less infectious version of plague could do that much damage thousands of years ago,
Right.
What does that tell us about our own vulnerability today, even with all our technology? How can understanding these ancient crises maybe help us prepare for, well, whatever comes next?
It definitely puts things in perspective, doesn't it? Thinking about that long relationship between us and disease, it's certainly something to chew on.